Red Bow is an adventure game with a horror setting, a pixel art style, and a cheap price. Whilst it sounds as if it has some key elements for a good game, can it tie it all together? Well, I'm Glenn for SwitchUp, thank you to the developers for the review copy, and now let's find out. You assume the role of a young girl named Ro. Waking up in the middle of the night, Ro is not sure whether she's dreaming or awake. She decides to leave the house and finds herself on an abandoned road, and here she meets QB, a mysterious creature that needs her help. Is she dreaming? What does this creature want? This is where the adventure begins. The story is quite obtuse at times, and there are a few spelling and grammatical errors too, but it did keep my attention just for how bizarre it was. Red Bow is a 2D top-down adventure game. It has a big emphasis on puzzle solving, with you needing to find items and use them in certain situations in order to be able to advance, and for this reason has more of a point and click feeling than I was expecting when I first started playing, although it never goes full on down that gameplay path. You will traverse each area, searching every nook and cranny and looking at every item you find. Any items that you do find can be obtained with you putting them in your inventory, which can then be accessed by pressing the plus button and selecting the first picture. I'm not the biggest fan of pictorial options, although thankfully it is quite easy to deduce what they are here. These items will then be needed at times in order to solve situational puzzles, and some of these puzzles are quite clever, sometimes needing you to use more than one item in order to affect the world around you and clear a path or obtain a new item. The puzzles are generally based in logic, and although you will need to look absolutely everywhere to find some of them, at least you do not rely on crazy leaps of faith in order to work them out. You will also encounter other characters who you will need to interact with, sometimes needing to assist them with a problem before you can move on, and again, this works quite well. However, that's not to say that the game is without problems. There are a few moments in the game where you will check an item and it will seem as if it's just a background detail, only for you to then need to return and pick it up later when it becomes relevant. Now, point and click games have been using this technique for years, but it's not handled very well in this game, unfortunately. At times you will click on an item or a shelf, for example, and it will declare that there's nothing of interest, only for you to need to recheck it later. The subtle clues that let you know that you may need to return to a particular item in classic point and click games are either a little too subtle here or just completely non-existent. There was a point where I discovered an item too late due to this, and it looked as though I would need to start the game again. Thankfully, there is a workaround which involves rechecking another item that you've already looked at in order to go down a slightly different story path, but the gameplay just seems to confuse itself a little too often like this. There are also a few odd gameplay quirks, including one huge red herring that had me stumped for ages, assuming that I had done something wrong, despite me following where the game was apparently leading me. Having looked into it, it appears that this red herring earns you a trophy on the PlayStation version of the game, but doesn't actually advance the story. Obviously, with no achievement system on the Switch, it serves no real purpose at all other than to confuse you and make you feel as if you are missing something. This isn't the only time it happens either, although the other times are nowhere near as obtrusive, and it almost feels like they built the game around the trophies they wanted to give to certain versions, which is a strange choice and is detrimental to the experience on the Switch. The controls are also quite fiddly at times too. For example, here I just picked up a crowbar and I'm attempting to open the manhole cover. I click on the manhole cover to see if the game will prompt me to use it, but it doesn't, although it does interact with the manhole. I then go into my inventory and select the crowbar and nothing happens. For some reason the game had moved me away unbeknownst to me, so I had to go forward again until the word manhole appeared and then select the item from my inventory. It's odd moments like this that have the potential to become frustrating, as I may have thought I wasn't to use that item at that point and just walked off instead. Another important point to note is that the game doesn't autosave and you can be killed at certain points. Having played for about an hour, I began to get the feeling that it was effectively going to be pure puzzles with no deaths, so didn't save very often. However, you can be killed for getting certain puzzles wrong, and I did do this and lost a big chunk of progress. When you do complete an area, you will find yourself back at home, wondering if you are dreaming, before finding yourself once again in a strange environment that must be explored with a new set of problems needing to be solved. Now, I know I've just reeled off a huge list of negatives and they absolutely need highlighting, however I do want to say that the game isn't as bad as these undoubtedly make it sound. The gameplay is certainly flawed, but there is actually a half decent adventure game here hidden behind some poor design choices. Gameplay scores 12 out of 20. Controls are okay for the most part, but are a little too fiddly. Having to pull up the pause menu for your inventory rather than having a contextual prompt on screen just feels a little archaic and they score 13 out of 20. Graphically, Red Bow is reminiscent of an 8-bit Pokemon game, with a similar style in terms of the buildings and general layout. Although obviously going for an 8-bit style, it uses a full range of colours, with a colour palette far and beyond those that were available to games on an 8-bit system. Colours are vibrant and there are also some nice character animations at times too. Whilst I think it's fair to say that the video game market has become quite oversaturated with the 8-bit style, I can at least appreciate the fact that the developers have made full use of certain advances in technology such as a full colour palette, whilst restricting themselves in other areas. I also like the variety in the areas that you visit and how this changes the graphics up a little bit too. In terms of the audio, Red Bow is quite an odd experience. In some sections of the game, there is no music at all, but there are sound effects such as rain falling. In other areas there is no music and no sound effects, apart from those made by your character's feet on the ground. And finally, some sections do include music, but the loop is so short that it will grind on you in next to no time at all. Visuals are bright and colourful without ever really wowing and get 12 out of 20. Audio on the other hand goes from grating to non-existent and gets just 9 out of 20. Red Bow costs £4.99, €4.99 or $4.99, and it will probably take a couple of hours to play through for most people, although once you know what to do, you can blitz it in well under an hour. There are a few different endings to find, but again, the way to find them is just incredibly cryptic. I think £3.59 would have been a fairer price for the UK, with that probably equating roughly to what American or European buyers are paying anyway, but it's still quite a decent price in all fairness. If it were 2 hours of pure enjoyment, then it would certainly be worth it, but the fact that at times during that 2 hours you'll feel quite frustrated means that value scores 12 out of 20. To conclude, Red Bow is a decent game that could have been better with a few smarter design choices. It most certainly isn't bad and is priced quite fairly, and I get the impression from the end credits that it was made by just one person, so credit where it's due. To be brutally honest, this feels like the sort of game you get for free with PlayStation Plus 1 month, put the couple of hours into it to earn yourself a platinum, and then never play it again. The fact that you can't do that on the Switch makes it an even harder recommendation. Red Bow gets a SwitchUp score of 58%. So there we have it. I don't like to criticise what is probably a one-man team, and the game certainly has its merits, but it's also quite difficult to recommend as well. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this review. Please do remember to leave a like if you did, and consider subscribing for all things Switch all the time. A quick thank you to our Patreons as always for your continued support, and to each and every one of you for watching our videos. Take care, and until next time, happy gaming.